It all comes down to a book of pictures, a simple family photo album, the kind every family used to have, sitting on a coffee table or a shelf in the living room. A faux leather cover, maybe. Black paper pages with those little corner tabs holding the photos in place. Pictures of birthdays, of holidays, of kids making goofy faces in the backyard. For normal stuff, but for the Sodder family, that album became everything. It was proof. It was memory, and in the end, it was their only real tool to solve a mystery that tore their lives apart. And then, just like their children, the album disappeared. To understand why a photo album matters so much, you have to go back to Christmas Eve, 1945. It's Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodder family was a big one. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children. One was away in the army, but 9 were home that night. The older kids had been allowed to stay up late playing with new toys. Jenny took the youngest ones to bed and then went to sleep herself, thinking George and the older boys were still downstairs. The phone rang around 1 in the morning. Jenny answered it. It was a woman asking for a name she didn't know. Jenny heard laughter and clinking glasses in the background. A wrong number, she thought. A Christmas party somewhere. She hung up and went back to bed. On her way, she noticed the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. The kids must have forgotten. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and fell asleep again. She woke up a short time later to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. What happened next was a nightmare of things going wrong. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children who slept downstairs managed to escape the burning house. But 5 other children were trapped upstairs: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Their ages ranged from 5 to 14. George Sodder ran around the house, frantic. He wanted to get his ladder to climb up to the second-floor window and rescue his kids. But the ladder wasn't in its usual spot. It was gone. He thought he'd use his work trucks to pull up to the house and climb on top of them. He had 2 coal trucks. Neither of them would start. The engines were dead, even though they had worked perfectly the day before. Someone ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, but the phone line was dead. Another neighbor had to drive into town to find the fire chief. By the time the fire department finally showed up, hours later, the Sodder home was a pile of smoldering ash. The fire chief, a man named F.J. Morris, told the grieving parents that the fire had been so hot, it would have cremated the children's bodies completely. There was nothing left to find. For George and Jenny, that explanation never felt right. It was too neat, and too many things had gone wrong that night. The missing ladder, which was later found tossed in an embankment 75 feet away. The dead trucks. The cut phone line, which a telephone repairman later confirmed had been deliberately severed. And the biggest thing of all, they found no bones, no skulls, no teeth, nothing. The official story was that the fire started from faulty wiring, but George had just had the house rewired and inspected. He believed someone had taken his children. The fire was just a cover. The Sodders refused to believe their children were dead. They started their own investigation. They learned of strange things happening before the fire. A man had come to the house trying to sell them insurance, and when George refused, the man warned him that his house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. He said it was because of the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. George, an Italian immigrant, was a vocal critic of the dictator. Another man was seen watching the younger Sodder children as they came home from school. A local bus driver said she saw the children peering out of a car window the morning after the fire while the house was still burning. A woman at a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed she saw the children with 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian extraction. She said they refused to let the kids eat and seemed to be in a hurry driving a car with a Florida license plate. George and Jenny followed every lead. They spent their life savings trying to find answers. In 1952, they put up a billboard on Route 16 right outside of Fayetteville. It showed the pictures of their 5 missing children, offered a reward, and asked for any information. That billboard became a local landmark, a permanent, heartbreaking reminder of the mystery. For decades, it stood there, a testament to a family's refusal to give up hope. The years rolled on. The local authorities considered the case closed, but the Sodders kept searching. They hired a private detective from a nearby town. The detective uncovered a strange story about the fire chief F.J. Morris. He supposedly found a human heart in the ashes of the home. He claimed he put it in a metal box and secretly buried it. Years later, he confessed this to a minister and showed George where it was buried. And George had the heart tested by a funeral director. It turned out to be fresh beef liver, untouched by fire. It seemed like a bizarre attempt to convince the Sodders that their children were, in fact, dead, and that they should stop looking. But why? Why plant fake evidence? It only made George and Jenny more certain that there was a conspiracy, and that someone in their town knew more than they were saying. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, something new arrived. A letter. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and it was addressed to Jenny Sodder. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid to late 20s. He had dark, curly hair and dark eyes. He looked to the Sodders like their son Louis might look as an adult. He strongly resembled their other sons. On the back of the photo, there was a cryptic, handwritten message. It read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A90132 or A90135. The family was stunned. Frankie was one of their other sons. Illo was a mystery. And the numbers looked like they could be a zip code, or maybe a military ID number. Like, it was the first real, tangible clue they had received in over 2 decades. It was a jolt of hope so powerful it must have felt like a lightning strike. Could this really be him? Was Louis alive? And if he was, where were the others? This photo changed everything. It wasn't a vague sighting anymore, it was something they could hold in their hands. Something they could analyze. They needed help. So George and Jenny hired another private detective. This time from Washington, D.C., they gave him the photo. They told him their story. The detective listened, and he told them he would investigate the lead. He seemed professional, competent. He told them he needed to take the original photo back to his lab. But he also needed something else. He needed to compare the features of the man in the photo to pictures of Louis as a child. He needed to see if the ears matched, if the nose had the same shape, if the hairline was similar. He needed the family photo album. This is where that simple book of pictures becomes the most important object in the world. For the Sodders, that album wasn't just for reminiscing. It was their only link to the faces of the children they lost. It held the definitive, confirmed images of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. As a baseline, it was the ground truth against which all other claims could be measured. Without that album, a picture of a supposed adult Louis was just a picture of a stranger. With it, it could be the key to finding their son. The Sodders trusted the detective. They gave him what he asked for. They handed over their most precious possession, that old family album filled with black and white photos of their lost children. They gave him the original photo of the mystery man. They gave him their trust and their money. The detective promised to analyze the photos, track down the source of the letter, and report back to them soon. He promised he would return the album. He took the photo album and left, and he was never heard from again. George and Jenny waited. Weeks turned into months. They tried to call him. The number was disconnected. They tried to write to his address. The letters came back, returned to sender. The private detective had vanished. And with him, he took the original photo of the mystery man, and more importantly, he took the Sodder family's photo album. The cruelty of this act is hard to comprehend. It wasn't just a lost clue. It was a second theft. First, their children were stolen from them in the middle of a Christmas night. Then, more than 20 years later, their memories, their proof, the very tool they needed to follow their most promising lead, was stolen too. You have to wonder who that detective was. Was he a real detective at all? Or was he a con artist who just saw a grieving family as an easy source of cash? Maybe. That's the simplest explanation. He took their money, took their album because it seemed valuable or interesting, and then just disappeared, moving on to his next scam. But in the context of the Sodder case, nothing is ever that simple. It feels like part of the same pattern. The latter disappearing right when it was needed most. The trucks died at the critical moment. The phone line being cut. The fire department showing up too late. The official investigation being closed too quickly. The fire chief planting fake evidence, and now the one piece of evidence that could have blown the case wide open, and the one tool needed to verify it, both gone at the same time. It feels deliberate. It feels like someone was still, after all those years, actively working to keep the Sodders from finding the truth. Someone who knew that the photo album was the key. Someone who understood that without those original photos of Louis as a boy, the family could never definitively prove the man in the new photo was their son. They could show copies to people, sure, but the originals, the source material, were gone forever. The loss of the album was a devastating blow. It didn't just stop their investigation in its tracks, it poisoned the one piece of hope they had. Was the photo of Louis a genuine message from their long-lost son, or was it a fantastically cruel hoax, designed to lure them into a trap where they would lose the last physical connection they had to their children's past? They would never know. They couldn't hire another detective to look into the photo because the original was gone. They couldn't do their own comparisons because their album was gone. All they had left was a copy of the Louis photo and their fading memories. And George Sodder never stopped looking. He traveled to Kentucky, trying to find the source of the letter, but found nothing. He died in 1969, just a year or two after the detective disappeared with the album. He died without ever knowing what happened to his children. His wife, Jenny, continued to tend to the memorial garden she had planted at the site of their home, and she wore black every day for the rest of her life. She passed away in 1989. The billboard finally came down after her death. The remaining Sodder children, and now their children, have continued the search. They've talked to reporters, appeared on television shows, and kept the story alive online. But they are always one step behind. They are working with copies of copies, with memories of stories. The core evidence has been stripped away, piece by piece, over the decades. And the photo album is the most tragic piece of that puzzle. It represents the moment the search for the Sodder children went from being a fight against the past to a fight against an active, present-day force that seemed determined to silence them. Someone didn't want them to have that photo of Louis, and someone didn't want them to have the album to compare it with. Why? What was in that album that was so dangerous? Was it just the photos of the missing kids? Or was there something else? A photo of a family friend, a neighbor, a relative who might have been involved? We will never know. The album is gone. It's a clue that disappeared. More than that, it was the key to all the other clues, and it was stolen right when it was needed most. The story of the Sodder children is full of unanswered questions. Who cut the phone line? Who moved the ladder? Who were the people in the car with the kids who sent the photo of Louis? And who was the detective who stole the family's memories? That last question might be the most telling. The fire could have been the work of a small group of local people with a grudge, but the disappearance of a private detective from Washington, D.C. 2 decades later suggests something bigger. It suggests the cover-up was organized, that it had reach, and that it was still active long after the flames had died down. The missing photo album is a perfect symbol for the entire case. It's a story about a family that had everything taken from them, and then, when a single ray of hope appeared, someone reached in and took that too. It's about how evidence can be erased, how memories can be stolen, and how a family's search for the truth can be deliberately and cruelly sabotaged. It sits at the heart of the mystery, a ghost of a clue. A reminder that some questions aren't just unanswered, they've been intentionally made unanswerable. And that, in many ways, is the most tragic part of the whole story. The Sodders didn't just lose their children, they lost the very tools they needed to find them. And that empty space on the shelf where the photo album used to be is just as haunting as the empty patch of ground where their home once stood.